So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, where I will discuss how you can use Turnitin to uphold IB academic integrity standard, but also how you can really support your students through their writing process. My name is Krista. I've had the pleasure to working with many IB schools across Europe for the past 3 years. Joining me today is my colleague Harry. Harry works with all the schools in the UK, and he will help me with the Q&A section of the webinar. Before we start, I do want to thank Edward Parker, the IB Diploma Coordinator of Cologne International School. As you might have noticed, my first invite included academic honesty instead of academic integrity. As the IB has rebranded this during my maternity leave, Edward was nice enough to point that out to me, so thank you. Just before we start, a few housekeeping rules. To keep the background noise to a minimum, everyone is muted. You're welcome to shoot any questions you have our way. Please do this in the Q&A section of Zoom, where it's easiest for us to organize and make sure we follow up on that questions. So not the chat, but the Q&A section, please. Lastly, the webinar will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. So today's, I will start talking about integrity in both the IB program and within Turnitin, as we know this is an important topic within the IB. But as I mentioned before, it's also very much about how you can support your students. So I want to talk a little bit about why feedback is so important. Also, due to COVID-19, we've seen some of the changes in education kind of accelerate. So I do want to talk about some of the big developments we see in the education sector and how Turnitin ties into this and how we can help overcome these challenges and help within these trends. Hopefully after this webinar, you know how to take the next steps toward academic excellence within your school, and we'll have some time to answer some of your questions live. So let's start with the basics, integrity. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, putting up this quote, but I think it's important to highlight how important integrity and honesty values are within the IBO. And we're very grateful having partnered with the IB for many years to uphold those values. At the same time, looking at this second quote, it is very important that we look at the bigger picture. We're setting up the students not just to pass their IB diploma program, we're really making sure we set them up for success in their next steps, going into higher education, but also in their life general. In Dutch, we have a saying, jong geleerd, oud gedaan, which means what you get taught young, at a young age, you will do when you get older. So really setting up those students with those integrity values from a young age, you know, really for them to understand what it really means. They should naturally be able to act upon those values when they get older. As Turnitin, as a company, integrity has always been at the forefront of what we do. As you can see from this quote from our CEO, integrity is at the heart of all we do. Part of this means that we want our tool to be used as a teaching tool rather than punishing tool. So it's nice to hear that some of our customers really actually take this on board. And it's nice to hear that actually, you know, our similarity checking helps students to think about what authenticity or originality really means. Which brings me nice to the next point, the importance of feedback. Why is feedback so important, and how does Turnitin tie into this, as we're still mainly known for a tool to check plagiarism with. Turnitin was founded by 4 university students as a peer review, but pretty fast turned into a plagiarism prevention service. But actually after that, we really started to work on grading tools, feedback tools, and in 2010 we launched all-in-one solution, Turnitin Feedback Studio. In one place, you are able to check for similarity, give feedback to students, and grade papers with the grading rubrics if preferred. I will go into a little bit more detail about this later, but I do want to share with you some numbers in regards to this. And this is really our main goal. Like I said, we don't want our tool to be used as a punishing tool. it's really to open a conversation with the students when there's high similarity detected, to really find out why that is, and how this can be prevented. And it's great to actually hear students say, oh, in the long goal, I actually felt using Turnitin that I became a better writer, because having those conversations, what does original writing really means? Now, the whole COVID-19 situation has completely changed our day-to-day life. Some countries are getting a little bit more back to normal, but definitely across the world, we've seen a massive changes in day-to-day life. Within trends in education, we actually haven't seen any really big new emerging trends, but we actually see trends that have just completely accelerated. So for example, online and blended learning. So of course, beginning of the year, I think Italy was one of the first ones in Europe in February, where the schools all had to close. And of course, you had also the situation where the May IB exams were cancelled. And we all had to very quickly adjust. It's still a question whether this might have a big change in the coming future. I read the interview with the chief of the IB, Siva Kumari, talking about the 2-year ongoing assessment being very heavy summative experience, and that doesn't really reflect the real world anymore. So we definitely see probably a change within the next couple of years in any case. But then on the other side of online and remote learning is that it doesn't fit with every student. There are many students struggling with this change for many different reasons. Some countries, it's harder to get access to internet or laptops, but also self-motivation and missing that social contact. The relationship between students and teacher, but also students amongst each other is still very important. So in response to this, we have created a remote learning landing page, which has a lot of tips and tricks on remote learning, but also remote working. And looking at the edtech industry, a lot of companies like us have really tried to step up and supporting the education sector as much as possible. We've seen a massive uptake, for example, Microsoft Teams, and their development had to speed up. I saw a tweet online, a teacher asking Microsoft if they could please help her making sure that her students couldn't mute her. So I think we all can imagine what was happening here. And Microsoft really had to speed up the process of development, making sure they would iron out these little issues. Also, I saw something online about a student changing their name in Zoom, which I did not even know that you could do, into reconnecting ... and turn his camera off. So it looked like he just kept reconnecting and had really bad internet. Actually, he did this so he just did not have to answer on any of the live questions. So how we learned a lot during this period of online learning and remote working. I think there's still a lot for us to learn. And we'll have to see what next year will bring, if we are able to go back into the classroom in every country or not. So another trend, contract cheating. While we see in general a lot of education trends going from higher education dripping into secondary education, I think this is one of the trends that schools and maybe private and international schools even a little bit longer have faced. While we see an uprise in websites offering writing assignments, the struggles that we hear from schools often that there's a little bit too much support from parents or private tutors. So the students are getting a little bit too much help, which makes their work not their own anymore. It's a very difficult conversation, and it's very difficult for schools to act up on this. Having conversations with parents is challenging because they're often part of the problem, or they might know about the problem. And then being able to prove actually this is not the student's own work is very, very difficult. And that conversation is often a little bit of a bluff game. Therefore, we actually developed software looking at both deep document metadata and forensic language to help you identify where there might be an issue of contract cheating. And contract cheating is a very strong word. Like I said, I think for your students, it's probably that they're getting a little bit too much help, where actually it differs away from being their own work. Well, the similarity report is it's a bit more of a simple process. We check against the database and we give you results. This software is a bit more complex, so I don't really want to go into much detail about it. But if you find this interesting and you want to know more, please feel free to get in touch with you, and we can kind of dive deeper into how we can help and how we can help identify if it's not actually the student's own work. Now, another trend which has been going on for a really long time, fake news. It's scary that in this time of this pandemic outbreak, we rely on information, and a lot of information that is going around is not accurate. I'm going to admit and be honest and say that I'm a heavy Facebook user. Having moved from the UK to the UK 8 years ago, for me, it's a great way to keep in touch with people in the Netherlands, but also a good way to keep up to date with the news stories in the Netherlands. So I'm on social media quite a lot, and it's scary to see how many articles I see every day that contradict what the government here in the UK had said before. And also reading the comments of those people and see how confused they are about the rules, about the regulations, about the numbers, and much more. Fake news and credibility of sources, like I said, has been a topic with many of our customers for a really long time. But this pandemic has definitely highlighted how dangerous it is and how big of a problem it is. Therefore, I'm very happy that I can announce that about 1 or 2 months ago, we partnered up with NewsGuard. NewsGuard is a company that checks websites for credibility. This is done by journalists, so it's not an automated computer program, and they check things like ownership and where finances are coming from, but also the content, credibility, transparency around what is an advertisement rather than an article. So they give every website a score. And here on the slide, you can also see some of the criteria that they look at. You can also even read the full report on their website. But they will highlight what are more credible sources and what sources might not look as credible. Within this partnership, any Turnitin customer can get the NewsGuard plugin for the internet browser for free. That can be your staff, that can be your students, and definitely for students, it would be a great way to kind of help identify and also look at the criteria on what is a credible source. We're still kind of in investigation on how we can actually integrate this in our software, because the past few years we got that question a lot, where we show similarities with websites, but how can we see if that is a credible source? So now, how can Turnitin support you and your students, not just during this time of remote learning, but also when this hopefully is all over soon? As mentioned before, we are best known for our similarity reporting. The IB organization have been using our similarity check for many years. And using Turnitin at your school will give you the same quality check before the work goes to the IB. We check against the internet, student papers across the world, and publications. A couple of years ago, when I was at the IB Global Conference in Vienna, we actually had one of our customers coming up praising our services, which is always nice when that happens. But they actually really appreciated us, as they recently had a bit of an issue with one of their students. They submitted one of the student papers to our software, and it came up as a 100% match with a school in South America. Now, this school was in Spain, so kind of their first conclusion jump was there must be something wrong with Turnitin. But actually investigating it further, actually getting in contact with that school that they were matching against, they found out that there was 2 family members. So 2 cousins, both doing the IB curriculum in Spanish, being across the world from each other, thought, why do we, both have to do the same work? Why can we not collaborate a bit more? So it actually, highlights very well how important it is, to check that this is not happening at your school, and hopefully it's not. But how important also is in an international setting, where it's not about two students being in the same school, but it might be two students across the world from each other. But what I would also like to highlight, and it relates to the quote here from Deborah Brown, you can allow students to submit and resubmit, which means you can really give your students to the ownership of their own work. So they can submit their work to Turnitin, they can see the similarity report, they can make the changes that they feel are needed before they hand in their final version to you. So it's a very nice way really to give them that accountability and ownership of their work. Another great feature with Turnitin is peer review. As a teacher, you can set up questions that students have to answer about each other's work. But it's always good for the students to get feedback from their peers. It also allows them to think deeper about their own work when they're answering these questions or seeing how someone else solved a particular problem. But also part of it is that you can actually get students to answer those same questions about their own work. So it makes them look a little bit more objectively at their work and seeing if they're meeting all the criteria that are necessary for that assignment. Then, as I mentioned at the start, we really value feedback and believe this is the cornerstone of students' development. Most students actually like teachers to use Turnitin, as it speaks much more in their language, receiving online feedback. And now during this situation, it might be the only way you can actually get feedback to your students. You're able to use quick marks, which are pre-saved comments to save you time. You're able to link those comments to criteria in the grading rubric, so students understand specifically what they need to do to improve their work. Of course, you can grade with a grading rubric. You can also leave voice comments to make that deeper connection with your student. How you speak to one student in your classroom or the other might differ, so you can do that with Turnitin as well. And voice comments are also just a great way when you're just tired of sitting behind your laptop typing all day. When the weather is nice, you can sit in the garden and just talk to your laptop or iPad to give feedback to your students. Lastly, we also have an English spelling and grammar check integrated, especially if English is not your first language, which you probably have a lot of students where that's the case. It's a great help for your students. And again, students, if you allow that, can check this before they hand in their final version. So it's a nice first check for their students and kind of see what comments about their spelling and grammar they're getting back. So in conclusion, Turnitin can uphold the IB academic integrity values by checking the work of students, but also opening that conversation with the students and giving them the possibility to check their own work and taking that ownership. We're also able to check their spelling and grammar before handing in their final work. You can increase the engagement with your students by using peer review, especially now with limited contact with your students. It's actually a tool that can be very valuable. And last but definitely not least important, use our feedback tools to really support your students' development in their writing process. Thank you very much for your time today. I think we still have some time for questions. So Harry, are there any questions?
Hi, Krista. Thanks for that. It was really great. We've had a couple of questions come through in the Q&A box, but if anyone wants to add another one, there's still time to do that. The first question we've got is, what percentage of similarity is acceptable in the report?
So this is a question I pretty much get on a daily basis. We don't really advise on a percentage because it's very depending on the topic that the student writes or what kind of essay they're writing. So for example, if your students have to write about the Second World War, the amount of information in books on the internet of other student papers who've written about the Second World War, you should expect a certain amount of similarity, because there's only so many ways to say this, the Second World War started at this time and was started because of this. While if you're asking your student to write about their favorite holiday, or a coming back to school assignment, write about your holiday, you would suspect a very, very limited amount of similarity, because it should be something very personal to them. So we always say, the higher the percentage, you might have to have a look at it, because there's more likely that there's a case of plagiarism. But often we say you will see outliers. So if a whole class of students submit their work about the Second World War, and everyone has between 20 to 25% of similarity, a 0% or 50% might be as important to have a look at. I hope that answers the question.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question. Can Turnitin Feedback Studio be integrated with both ManageBack and Microsoft Teams?
So yes, short answer. We integrate both with Microsoft Teams and ManageBack. Now we do have a suite of tools. So Turnitin Feedback Studio is the one that's being most used by ISB schools, which integrates into ManageBack. Microsoft Team, the integration is actually built on a new platform where we have a similarity only checking as you would be using the Microsoft Teams feedback tools with that. So we have integrations for both platforms. They look a little bit different, but from a similarity checking perspective, you will be able to have the same check across both.
Fantastic. And another question. Can we get a recording of this webinar?
Yes, so as I mentioned before, we will send the recording out to you so you can have a listen back or share it with some of your other colleagues.
That looks like all of the questions that we've answered so far, and I don't think there's any more in the chat.
Okay, then I want to thank everyone again for their time. Like I said, I will send out the recording of this webinar, but I will also include my booking link. If you would like to discuss in more detail how Turnitin can support your school, please feel free to book in some time that best fits you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice day.